Good morning, everybody. Welcome in to the first edition of the Establish the Run First Look Show for this 2023 NFL season. I am your host, Gary Hartman. I will be here with you each and every week for a quick first glance at the upcoming NFL DraftKings slate. Usually, this show will be brought to you on Tuesday mornings at 11 a.m., which, is a true first look when we don't really have many impressions, another day less of analysis from everybody out there. But just due to some scheduling stuff, we are here on Wednesday this week. Purpose of this show is just as it sounds, to get ourselves familiar with this first look with the DraftKings slate at first glance. We're going to be 20, 25 minutes each week, kind of rapid fire style through each position on DraftKings, mostly from a tournament perspective, as that is my background, but we will talk through some obvious cash game options as well. If you were here with us last year, it really just was quick, kind of my thoughts on which players stood out for the upcoming week. We will potentially be messing around with the format a little bit this year. Maybe something a little bit looser, maybe some things where we can figure out how, when we're doing them early in the week on Tuesdays, where I kind of guess pricing before I even look at it and, figure some things like that. Maybe we'll do some very light lineup building, but for this week, we're going to stick to the traditional format that we established last year. And that is kind of going position by position, talking through these plays, figuring out, getting ourselves in the mindset, transitioning from week 1 to week 2. What's important? What should we look at? What kind of plays should we be considering from a chalk perspective, from a potentially contrarian perspective, and everything else that we might need to know for DraftKings tournaments. Really excited to do this. It's a great exercise for me as well to kind of see, without too much research, which plays stand out to me or which game environments, matchups I want to be attacking. So that said, let's dive right in here for week 2. I am a fast talker as well. I get that feedback quite a bit. So if you need me to slow down, or if you need to slow down this video on rewatch, I completely understand. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. Though here in week 2, we have a 12-game slate, not the 13 that we saw last week. And that's because we have 2 Monday night games. So one more game off the main slate. The teams that are not on the main slate, we have the Vikings and Eagles playing tomorrow night on Thursday night. So that's 2 big fantasy offenses that we don't have to think about. And then Sunday night, also Dolphins, Patriots. Obviously, the Dolphins coming off of a major week from a fantasy perspective. They are not on it. Week 2 last year, actually, if you look back as well, was the first Tua, Waddle, Tyreek Hill double stack that was optimal in fantasy. So we're 1 year separated from that. And then the double Monday night header is Saints, Panthers, Browns, Steelers. Not too much fantasy consequence there, but some for sure. So those are your teams not on the slate for this week, but we still do have 12 games, 24 teams, a lot to dive through early on in this season. The thing I want to talk about before we go into position by position is the game environments here and potential attack spots. So once again, early on here, only one game with a 50-point game total, and that is KC and Jacksonville. It's a 1:00 game. You'll see Calvin Ridley was the cover boy of the thumbnail on this video. We'll talk about him and the Jaguars in a minute. But that's the only game with 50 points. So again, nothing too obvious. I think this will probably be the most attacked game of the week for that reason. Looks like the most attractive environment. KC on the road in Jacksonville. They're coming off long rest. Jacksonville looked pretty good, over 30 points in their week 1 performance, in Indianapolis. So I think that game has the potential to shoot out for sure. After that, you do have a couple other games that look interesting in the mid 40s, 47.5. We have Seattle, Detroit. Seattle looked really lost last week. So that's prime bounce back spot, something I'll be talking about soon. And then Detroit on the long rest. We know we trust their offense to put up points. And then after that, couple in the mid 40s, 246.5. We got Ravens, Bengals, and Raiders, Bills. 2 games that I think are fully in play for game stacking options this week. So we'll talk through all of these. Let's start at the top in quarterback of the aforementioned Jaguars Chiefs game. Something also, if you've read my work over the years, I used to be a huge proponent of spending up at quarterback and, really attacking that ceiling. Something DraftKings has done now over the last year and a week, and we'll see, and I expect it to continue to go, is make the 2 poles of quarterback pricing very extreme. So we have really cheap quarterbacks on the low end, guys, right? Like Sam Howell was 4,900 last week. Even see Ryan Tannehill and some of these low end starters are right at 5K. And then you're really, high ceiling quarterbacks, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, are still sitting at that 8K range. That difference in price does matter these days. Even when Josh Allen hits over 30, 35 points, it might not matter if somebody on the 5 to 6K range is getting in the mid 20s or high 20s. So we still do get ceilings out of guys like Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields that we don't really get out of the lower tier. But we need those ceilings to be absolutely explosive for these to be the guys that we want. Now, those are very much in play still. And I like playing those ceiling outcomes. So I like playing these high-end quarterbacks quite a bit. And that's no different this week, but I just want us to start thinking about, there are quarterback options for you up and down the board in modern day DraftKings DFS. But let's start talking about Mahomes here. 8,300, no issues going to him. They raised him up 200, only at 20 points in week 1, but threw the ball 40 times. Obviously, could have had a much bigger day if it wasn't for Kadarius Toney and his ragtag group of misfits at receiver there who were dropping balls left and right. Hopefully, he gets Travis Kelce back. We mentioned the game environment being a great one. I have zero issues with Mahomes this week. A Mahomes Kelce stack always hard to get, and then you got to be looking at value. But we'll talk about some of that value throughout this video here. Josh Allen, looking to bounce back from a game he really wants to forget on Monday night in New Jersey against the Jets. But, another thing I wanted to bring up for week 2 here is to not get too take-hawked from week 1, right? We don't want to overreact to week 1. There are certain things, and if you look at Jack Miller's usage report on Established Run, or obviously some of the great stuff PFF does, and some of the usage stuff that we want to look into for week 1 that we want to take into consideration, right? Kieran Williams being above Cam Akers and some of the running back splits, and Christian Kirk really running less routes. We'll talk about that kind of stuff. That stuff is important, and the way you evaluate that can make or break your week 2, 3, 4. But just individual performance stuff and guys just falling flat on their faces or teams falling flat on their faces, it's very important not to overreact to that. We see this with the Bills this coming week. We see this with we'll talk about it with the Bengals, the Giants. Like, there are teams that we were excited about their fantasy offenses a lot just a week ago. And I don't want to completely change my tune because of one bad performance. So now you get Josh Allen heading home. Yes, it's a short week, but heading home against a Las Vegas team that overall I don't think we were too bullish on heading into this season. And it's a huge bounce back spot. That Bills team does not want to start 0-2, not in the very, very tough AFC. And I love getting myself into some Bills stacks this week. I think that's a great play. And the bringbacks are also very clean on Vegas. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it looks like maybe they can push if that, if the offense is condensed enough, who knows? There's also just a chance of a complete blowout here. And if that's the case, if it's 40-7 or something like that, you still probably want a piece of the Bills. So Allen might be my favorite of this group up top. Lamar also in a bounce back spot. Obviously, Ravens had no issues taking care of business against the Houston Texans in week 1, but that was not necessarily at the hands of Lamar. We saw J.K. Dobbins go down, and then they had a bunch of rushing touchdowns between Dobbins before he went out, and Justice Hill had a couple. Usually, I think that's a little bit fluky. Lamar probably is involved more from the touchdown perspective, considering he had 0 plus 3 turnovers or 2 with a 1 fumble loss, 1 interception. Only nowhere to go but up. But if I am to attack that game from a bounce back perspective, I think give me Joe Burrow. I know, listen, the calf stuff's a little bit scary. That was a really bad performance in week 1. I'm hoping that takes the field away from these Bengals stacks. I mentioned how this is a 46.5. That's kind of decent on this slate from an over-under perspective. On team totals, they are 4th or 5th on the week in 25 with a 25-point team total, very respectable. And, these AFC North matchups could get ugly. So maybe this plays under, and you don't want really either sides of this. But if I am to attack one, Burrow would be my preference, I think. Now, you do have the Lamar rushing floor, but $800 more. I have no issues attacking either side of the game. But I will say, if I attack it, I want lots of correlation. So bringbacks, things like that, especially in tournaments. Justin Fields, guy that always has a high floor because of that rushing, had another near 60 yards in week 1. They were playing from behind. This is a more even matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Did throw the ball 37 times in week 1. If we're getting that out of Justin Fields, though, you got to feel good about his ADP and where he was going. I'm worried about this Bears offense and team in general, but from a fantasy perspective, that's a guy that we can look at. In Tampa Bay probably looked a little bit better than we expected, especially on defense. So I think it's just okay compared to these other high-end quarterbacks, but we saw him have just slate-breaking upside multiple times last year, back-to-back 40-point games in the early mid part of the season, and that's just a spot that we want to attack. Trevor Lawrence is the way to attack that Chiefs-Jaguars game if you want to be able to save a little bit of money, right? You can do things like get Travis Kelce or double stack Trevor Lawrence or whatever, and you're saving that money from Mahomes. Is a dual threat. We're definitely very excited about this Jaguars team. Very much in play is Trevor Lawrence. Dak Prescott, I think I'm mostly ignoring this Jets Dallas game. This one seems ugly. Two really good defenses. Obviously, no Aaron Rodgers now to push. Maybe two of the top 3 or 4 defenses in the league. The Cowboys are favored by 9.5, but this is only a 39.5 over under. And it's not even like the Cowboys are one of the top team total teams on the week. They're only at a 24.5. For context, teams like the Bills, top of the list, are 28-point team total this week. Chiefs are 27, Lions 26.5. I think I'm mostly not as interested in the Jets-Cowboys game from a game stack perspective. Anthony Richardson, similar to the Justin Fields thing, great start for his first NFL game from a fantasy perspective. And he threw the ball 37 times, was a better thrower than we expected, completed nearly 65% of his passes. This is a game environment. It's only a 40.5, but there could be some fantasy goodness here. And I like to respect Vegas from the over-unders, but we have two teams here in Indianapolis and Houston that have some value options, have a quarterback here in Anthony Richardson that is a dual threat. I would be interested. They did raise him from 56 to 63, so I wouldn't go crazy, but he's probably in play for cash again, and he's in my tournament pool as well. Mentioned that Lions-Seahawks game being the second highest total on the slate. Less excited about Jared Goff when you consider you have so many dual threat, high ceiling quarterbacks on the slate. He's kind of stuck in that dead man zone of mid-tier. He brings nothing with his legs. What you really need to get out of him to be an optimal quarterback at this price on this type of slate is like 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. It's in the realm, but that's the kind of stuff you get from Joe Burrow more often than Jared Goff. So I like the Lions as one-off pieces, less so from a stacking perspective. Daniel Jones, I'm a Giants fan, so if you feel biased in my voice, take that for what you will. Obviously, week 1 was a complete and total disaster. This is a pretty good bounce back spot, but again, 6K, so that mid-tier kind of dead man zone does bring plenty of work with his legs. That offensive line looks really bad, though. However, you get as best of a possible bounce back performance as you can going into Arizona. I don't hate it for large field tournaments. I think he's in play. We saw him be an option all throughout last year. Geno Smith also had a week 1 to forget in last week, and the Rams really surprised, just putting the smackdown on the Seahawks. I know a lot of people in the fantasy community, in the best ball community, including myself, were excited about Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks for this year. I'm not willing to, again, this was a perfect example of not getting too bogged down by the week 1 outcome. If Seattle can just be 50%, 40% better than they were last week, really pretty poor offensive performance, I like them to push Detroit. I think Detroit's a better team, but this is a game that you can attack. Geno would be in my player pool for tournaments. But again, if I'm playing that game, it seems like I like the skill position players better than the quarterbacks. After that, these are guys, there are guys down here you could take shots on in tournaments. Russell Wilson is just okay. Definitely looked better for sure in his first game under Sean Payton than he did all of last year. I still question the ceiling here in a game environment with Washington that is meh at best. Brock Purdy, I think you could spend down to. This is not a guy that's going to have a major ceiling because he's not a threat with his legs necessarily, although he did have 20 rush yards last week. But man, the San Francisco team looks like a world beater. If you want to sprinkle him in some double stack stuff with San Fran, I get it. Not my type of play on a tournament slate from a ceiling perspective, but you still need that 30-ish point ceiling even from these 5K guys. But he's somebody you can consider. Jordan Love, I just don't trust this game environment, but gotta love what you saw out of him in his first start. Atlanta just wants to be so run heavy that I don't trust that. After that, you're probably ignoring most of these options down here. The one guy that I would consider taking maybe the smallest sprinkle on, even though he looks like absolute dog crap in week 1, is Ryan Tannehill. This is a guy that has had success around the red zone from a rushing perspective and gets a Chargers team that looked like they weren't able to stop the run or the pass in week 1. They are home as well. If the Chargers do get up and are able to make the Titans try to push, Tannehill's a very interesting dart throw in the largest field of tournaments. So quarterback's always going to be the time that we spend the most option on, because getting your quarterback right, getting your stack, getting your game environment right is the biggest key to DFS. If you are getting your stack and your quarterback wrong off the bat, in a tournament, you can kiss your weekend goodbye. So you need to get that environment right. It's absolutely critical. I try to keep my quarterback pool just for a little, behind the curtain for the way I play tournaments, kind of tight. That's changing a little bit, as I mentioned, with the pricing structure around quarterbacks of the last couple of years, but I still try to keep it tight. So hopefully that was able to kind of give you some insight about the way I'm looking this week. If you go over to running backs, looks like Christian McCaffrey probably still underpriced if we're getting vintage CMC back with a major role in San Francisco. I mean, they were up big from the jump, and he was still the primary back. Elijah Mitchell not involved nearly as much, only 5 carries, I believe, for Elijah Mitchell. So, man, 22 carries for CMC, another 3 receptions through the air, had a long touchdown. I don't really care about the matchup with Christian McCaffrey. And that was, quote unquote, tough matchup last week on the road in Pittsburgh. The Rams, yeah, they have Aaron Donald, but man, if you look at the personnel defensively, it's a bunch of undrafted rookies and guys that you probably don't know their names unless you're a Rams fan. So you can give me plenty of CMC. Curious where his ownership comes in. It depends on how much that value, how good that value is looking, but he's pretty clearly going to be the top running back on the slate, on each slate that he's on until further notice. Austin Eckler was pretty chalky last week, was a cash game option last week, and looked great. Very efficient on the ground, receiving work as well. And Josh Kelly was getting more involved. So, did look like he dealt with a little bit of an ankle injury, you can see here. So, keep that in with a grain of salt. I probably prefer CMC in a vacuum. Josh Kelly's an interesting dart throw as well, if Eckler is going to be limited at all. And Tennessee, not the easiest matchup. So don't like Eckler nearly as much as last week, but still Austin Eckler. Saquon Barkley in play as well. The Giants were able to get nothing going on Sunday night, but we know Saquon Barkley has a ceiling. I expect to bounce back from them. Atlanta wants to be incredibly run heavy. Bijan really looked good in his first NFL game. I have no issues going to Bijan Robinson or Tyler Algier in tournaments. I mean, they're going to run the heck out of the ball. It's a game in Green Bay that, last week the Bears, they didn't have the most success running between the tackles, but, they were able to get some stuff done through the air in garbage time. So I think Bijan, just the amount that Atlanta's going to commit to the run, that game environment as a whole scares me, but the running backs are in play. Pollard, the Bills, if they're able to do anything on Monday night, it was able to be somewhat efficient on the ground, or at least get the running backs involved. Tony Pollard's just a guy with such a good role and such a high ceiling that if I am to pick a piece from this game, it's probably Tony Pollard. But it's just in that game environment. This is week to play Derrick Henry, right? I mean, I usually like late season Derrick Henry, but we have no issues playing Derrick Henry against the Los Angeles Chargers at home in a team that has struggled mightily against the run for years now. So I don't have an issue with that. Josh Jacobs seems like a good correlation piece in that Bills game that we're interested in. Disappointing week 1 coming off the monster season last year, but you'll still take the 21 total touches out of Josh Jacobs. I'm excited about Travis Etienne and this Jaguars team. Looked like he mostly held off Tank Bigsby from an actual huge role perspective, and Bigsby still got a goal line carry. Man, this Jaguars team is going to be fantasy goodness all year. You take these 23 total touches out of Etienne, and what you really like to see is 5 receptions on 5 targets. This is a guy that we thought was going to be a big pass catcher coming out of school. Then the tape rose and everyone said he's not actually good at it. Maybe he's not, but in this offense, he'll be good. It can't really give you analysis on the Packers running backs. Aaron Jones left that game with a hammy, looked great before he left. If he's out, AJ Dillon would be in play, but it's, again, just a meh environment. Joe Mixon, again, I'm looking at correlation in that game, but I'd rather attack the passing attacks. There's a lot of running backs on this slate. Jahmyr Gibbs is only a large field tournament option. He was eased in, to say the least, in his first game as a NFL player. Looked good in his opportunity, 6 yards carry, and we know he'll be involved in the passing game, but he's more expensive than David Montgomery. You can't justify that, except in the lottos. So if you're playing the lotto, I think Gibbs is an interesting play. Other than that, I'm not interested. James Conner, volume play, if you want to go there, okay. You can make your player pool. James Cook, again, I guess he didn't end up being efficient, as I kind of previously mentioned, but looked good. Eye test wise, looked pretty good in that first half on Monday night. Did seem to be the lead back. Had 6 targets as well. They're using all their running backs in the past game, and we saw some Latavius Murray and Damian Harris in 2-minute stuff. That's a little bit concerning, but 6,100 is a fine price to pay for James Cook, especially in a matchup where they might be up early. Maybe there's some more rushing opportunities for him. As you get down into these other guys I mentioned, Montgomery before, I think Kenneth Walker would be in play in that same game environment. The Rams stuff certainly concerning with the Kieran Williams the Kieran Williams over Cam Akers, but that's a tough matchup against San Francisco. So probably a little bit not interested in that. Dameon Pierce, definitely was a little bit disappointing to see kind of that split with Devin Singletary and a little bit of Mike Boone. But this is still a guy that I think is by far the most talented. The matchup is right. I don't mind it, and the price is certainly right. They lowered him $200, so I definitely don't mind Dameon Pierce as an option this week. And as you go down, there's going to be plenty of guys for your Brian Robinson. We were encouraged with his role. Don't love the matchup there. Deion Jackson had that role to himself, was not at all efficient in it. This is a really good matchup now with Houston. Wouldn't be surprised to see some Indy running back get there, so keep an eye on news there. Evan Hull, the rookie, goes on IR. Zach Moss looks like he's going to be questionable. Could be a spot to save some money. Let's go over to receivers. I know I'm going to run a little long here on the first show of the season. Again, I mentioned how much I like Josh Allen as my spend-up option this week. But, after all that offseason talk about Stephon Diggs being unhappy in Buffalo, not liking this, not liking that, even in a super, super tough matchup with the Jets, the guy goes out and catches 10 balls on 13 targets, over 100 yards, finds the end zone. He's the most expensive player on the slate for a reason. I want him more in correlation than one-off plays because if I'm going one-off, I like some of these guys underneath him more. I love Jamar Chase on the bounce-back spot. Still had 9 targets, in that blowout, disappointing week 1 performance. But again, another AFC North matchup. They're more desperate than Baltimore for sure. They're at home. They want to get their season going. I have no issues with Jamar Chase. We know the ceiling's out of this world. And Amon-Ra, I'd imagine, is going to be an incredibly popular play after we saw what Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell did to the Seattle Seahawks team. This is a guy that is excellent on full point PPR DraftKings. So I have taken no issues with any of those 3 of your top receiver plays. Probably Amon-Ra might have your highest floor. You can argue about who has the highest ceiling, but all are great options. CD, tough matchup. I just mentioned Stephon Diggs was able to exploit it. Again, I think if I'm paying up, I want to kind of avoid that game. Doesn't mean in the largest field tournaments he doesn't make my consideration, but I want to avoid that game. Isaac Hockey in chat asks if I worry about early at all for Devontae Adams with the Jacoby Myers role in week 1. For me, the answer is absolutely not. Anytime you see an offense that's going to be that condensed, which is basically all the targets were Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, or Josh Jacobs. Jacoby Myers dealing with the concussion seems 50-50 to play, but even if he does play, Devontae still had 9 targets, still an absolute monster of a receiver. Just demands targets when he's out there. Not at all worried, and you get a little bit of a discount. Matchup, whatever, but game environment and game script should be fantastic for Devontae Adams. I think Devontae Adams is a great play, great bring back this week. Really like it for tournaments. Really going to be hard to recommend Gary Wilson with Zach Wilson out there when he's priced up around these top guys, unfortunately. And then Calvin Ridley was the guy that, I'm sure a lot of the industry is loving. He's probably going to be incredibly popular, but hard to ignore after week 1. The offseason buzz seemed to match the on-field performance in the first game of the regular season, 8 for 101 and a touchdown on 11 targets. Just seemed to be dominating. He also lost a fumble, so it could have been even bigger. Oh, no, he didn't lose a fumble. Sorry. Just had a fumble. So it did 27 points, 27 DraftKings points. You'll take that all day. They did price him up, but not high enough in a game that has the highest over-under of the week. He's the clear alpha there. A little bit worried about Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk's an interesting bounce-back candidate. I would use him in tournaments. Zay Jones. You can double stack these guys. Ridley very clearly has a ceiling like everyone else above him, and it's good to see the Calvin Ridley evolve back in this Doug Peterson offense. A little bit worried about the Chargers. I mentioned Justin Herbert too much, but I'm only worried in the sense that from a fantasy perspective. First of all, Brandon Staley seems like these teams, all the Chargers, before Brandon Staley, these Staley teams seem to underachieve. First week of Kellen Moore, I don't want to get too bogged down in what I saw. There, it was a great game environment. It was the one to attack, and there were guys to attack. Keenan Allen got his 9 targets. I'm just worried about if I'm attacking Justin Herbert stacks, just the ceiling. Like, he is so good, and I think the ceiling is always actually in there, but we haven't seen these 30-plus point DraftKings games out of him, in a while. And I think Kellen Moore is going to get him some, but just something to consider. The game environment might not be the best on the road in Tennessee. Tennessee looked better than we expected, probably from a defensive perspective. On the other side, though, DeAndre Hopkins and the Titans, we saw just what Tyreek Hill and that Dolphins pass game was able to do to this team. I mentioned I'm interested in Derrick Henry, also interested in Hopkins and Burks, and that's why I kind of mentioned Tannehill as a deep sleeper. One-off plays here for sure on these Titans receivers, though, would be in play. Other guys can't really evaluate Denver's receiving options until we know about Jerry Jeudy's status, but Cortland Sutton looked like the guy there. I mentioned Anthony Richardson being in play, and Michael Pittman, a guy that we were kind of giving a lot of hate to in the offseason just because we weren't sure about his offense, more of a possession guy. But hey, you're going to get 11 targets out of him, and Anthony Richardson is going to look better than we thought. And he was 3 yards away from a bonus on DraftKings. Could have been a huge week out of Michael Pittman in week 1. Now, the game environment doesn't scare you either. Don't love Houston's ability to push as much. So maybe I don't like him as much as last week, but he's in play. T. Higgins, excellent bounce back candidate after the goose egg, still at 8 targets. I mean, again, I'm attacking this Bengals team this week in a bounce back spot. The Seattle guys as well, Metcalf, Lockett, maybe even JSN if he's going to be used all in play for tournaments. Ayuk broke the slate. Week 1, caught all 8 of his targets, almost 130 yards, found the end zone twice. Sign me up. Sign me up. I don't think he is repeating that week by any means, but he's a great play. It's under 6K. Gabe Davis makes sense with Josh Allen stuff. Was on the field plenty in week 1. Only used 2 for 32. This is the story of Gabe Davis. We like him more this year because he was cheaper from an ADP perspective, and he's ideally healthier than he was last year. But just being out on the field with every Josh Allen snap is the Gabe Davis thesis. No issues. Love Mike Williams again this week. Anytime you're getting him at 5,700, the ceiling is insane. I think still want to see kind of how this Chargers offense settles in with Kellen Moore getting him more targets. Just going down the list here with some other guys. I'm a little worried about TJ Moore, only 2 for 25. It looked like Darnell Mooney was his favorite target. I don't want to overreact. Again, for playing field stuff, Moore is on my radar. Going down more, all the Ravens guys will be in play as well. Dustin asks, Bengals double, Zay Flowers bring back. Sure, no issues with that. I think that the Bengals traditional doubles are certainly in play because of how condensed their offense is. But, it's one of the few teams that I am as comfortable as the field playing, Higgins and Chase. I'll just say, traditionally, if you read some of my stuff behind the paywall on ETR, it's not the same when it's kind of the Dolphins, when it's everything's going to Hill and Waddle. When it's the top 2 receivers that are both expensive, usually if a guy's hitting 40 points, it's impacting the other's ability to hit 40 points. I don't think that's necessarily the case on the Bengals, but they do still have Joe Mixon, Irv Smith, Tyler Boyd. I don't love like a T. Higgins, Jamar Chase double stack as much as your run-of-the-mill GPP bro might. I don't hate it. I put it in play. But anyway, any kind of Joe Burrow Chase with some other Bengals piece, whether it's Higgins or otherwise, with a Flowers bring back, certainly would be in play. Guy we have to discuss, and Flowers, great play. I mean, they brought him up 1,000, but looked the part in every way in week 1. I'm completely avoiding Drake London until further notice. Puka Nacua, they bring him all the way up from Stone Mint to nearly 5K after a 15-target opening performance, kind of just fully took on the Cooper Kupp role. Hard to completely ignore that. And, if you want to get into Purdy stuff or CMC stuff, he's in play. I'm curious how much the field attacks him at this price. But, he seems legit. And I think just on our early stuff, I'm not going to give anything away. I think he's like in our top 5 or 6 for projected targets for this week. So you can't ignore that. And there's plenty of guys under the 5K range that you can get into. Tutu Atwell also had plenty of production last week. I don't think the Rams will have nearly as much success against San Francisco as they did against Seattle. But Matthew Stafford certainly looked vintage and was happy to see that. Nico Collins would definitely be in play for me. And now Noah Brown was just ruled out. So that's just some starting targets taken off the field. But 11 targets. I mentioned maybe attacking some Anthony Richardson stuff. So I think Nico's an interesting bring back there. And then this is the guy I wanted to talk before moving on to tight end. I'm one of those Giants fans that's a Kadarius Toney hater. And man, was that one of the all-time worst performances, just like completely embarrassing on this guy's part. I'll keep this professional. But the guy had 5 targets. They're drawing up plays for him. We know Andy Reid's way to work guys through things is just to play them. He's only 4,600. There's big playability there. That's the kind of GPP play that you need to have the balls to just go right back to, because he is better than any other receiver options outside of Travis Kelce from a talent perspective. And, he's able to get open. So I think, there's no he's dropping 4 balls again and, letting one go right through his hand for a pick 6. Like, that's the all-time worst possible outcome for Kadarius Toney in week 1. Had 10 days to sit on that. You could play some Kadarius Toney in tournaments this week for sure. Stoneman guys, check out my cheap wide receiver volume article on Established Run. Will come out tomorrow. If you're behind the paywall, we'll talk about some of those cheap receiving options. But let's keep moving on here quickly. I'll cover tight end and we'll get out of here. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, both going to find themselves questionable again. And, tight end slates are impossible to look at without these two. And we saw no one get over like 65 yards in the entire week last week. Tight end's an ugly position. If those guys play, they're my 2 favorite by far. Kelce especially. Seemed like he probably could have gone in week 1 if he absolutely had to. If it was a big game, he would have went. So, it's expensive to play up a tight end, but he's got an insane ceiling in the best game environment of the week. I don't want to overthink that. Andrews as well, certainly in correlation. Darren Waller, you get a discount on, it was really hard to take anything seriously from that Giants offense, but he's going to be their target hog. Still had 5 targets in an absolute blowout. This is a matchup I like. Hopefully weather's good there, or don't, whatever. Good spot for Darren Waller. After that, your usual suspects. I like to try to be correlated with my tight ends if I can, especially in tournaments. Higbee, I would imagine a bounce back spot. I think only have like a 7.5% target share. We just mentioned all the stuff that went to Puka. That's, a little sticky, but, again, tough matchup here. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's sticky, but tough matchup here. Komet in field stuff is fine. I'm really avoiding these Falcons offensive passing game until I can see it. That's a run spot for me. Pitts is talented enough to make a tournament player pool at that price. Dolchich looks like he's going to be out. So if you want to take like a long shot on Adam Troutman, you can get weird at tight end if you're not paying up. There's a lot of options for you on the low end. Kate Otten, if Mark Andrews doesn't play, Isaiah Likely once again would be an option despite the goose egg in week 1. So, feel free to mess around with some of your cheap options there. Okay. That'll do it right at 30 minutes. We're going to try to keep these closer to 20, 25 in the future weeks, and these will be on Tuesday morning. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what this will look like. Hopefully that gave you a quick breakdown and look at this first slate and kind of the ways I'm thinking it through. There'll be plenty of content for you all week at Established Run, both free on this YouTube page and, of course, behind the paywall. We had Adam and Evan with their team-by-team pods come out yesterday. Usually I'll be saying look out for those later in the day on these Tuesday mornings. And we'll have plenty for you all week with the shows and articles starting to really come out, with projections probably coming out later today or early tomorrow morning. Good luck, everybody, for week 2. Excited to be back for this 2023 season, and I will see you in 6 days next Tuesday. Take care, everyone.